Hello, and welcome to the second webinar from the Poison Centre project here at ECHA. My name is Heidi Rasakari, and I work in the Poison Centre team. And today my colleagues and I will present you with an in-depth look on using the unique formula identifier for your mixtures and products. In today's webinar, we will explain the UFI concept, show you how to generate a UFI, and provide practical insight on how to use and manage UFIs in your company. You are welcome to submit questions related to today's presentations through the Q&A panel visible in your webinar window. And if you are experiencing any technical problems, then please use this panel to let us know, and we will help you to fix the issue. Our panelists are on standby to answer your questions, and we will try to answer as many as possible. However, if you do not receive an answer before the end of the webinar, you can always resubmit your question to the ECHA Help Desk. This webinar will be published on our YouTube channel, as well as in the webinar section on the ECHA website, if you wish to revisit the slides or presentations again. But before I begin with the first presentation, I would like to mention that all the latest information and news related to the ECHA Poison Centres project can easily be found from one central location from our Poison Centres website. So to begin, I will explain a bit about the UFI concept and how it came to be developed. To set the scene a little, last year in March, Annex 8 to the CLP was published. The Annex, which is concerned with the harmonisation of information relating to emergency health response, obliges importers and downstream users of mixtures classified for health or physical hazards to submit certain information before placing them on the market. The information must be submitted to the nationally appointed bodies, who in turn make the information available to poison centres for the purposes of their work. ECHA also has an obligation, that is, to provide the tools and support to facilitate the submission of information, and without going into detail, the Poison Centre team here at ECHA has been involved in a number of projects with various stakeholders. Concerning the UFI project, we have the UFI generator tool, which is available for use and will be covered in more detail later in the webinar. We have also recently published version 1 of the European Product Categorisation System, and we are preparing to publish the harmonised XML format for the preparation of a submission. We also have specific Annex 8 guidance, which is to be expected to be finalised at the end of this year. And finally, we have planned to release the first version of a central submission portal early next year. As set out in Annex 8, the deadline for the submission of information is according to the user type. So, the first deadline of January 2020 is for mixtures intended for consumers. Mixtures for professional use are required to be notified by 2021, and mixtures for industrial use only by 2024. For mixtures already notified under national regimes, there is a transition period ending by 2025, unless a change or update to the existing notification is made in the period from the relevant deadline to the end of the transitional period. In general terms, the submission of harmonised information requires the full chemical composition, the toxicological information, the label elements, a product category, plus other relevant product and mixture details. Also required is the unique formula identifier, or the UFI, which is a new obligation for industry and the focus of our presentations today. It has been estimated that poison centres have difficulty in identifying the correct product in about 40% of calls they receive. As a result, immediate and accurate advice can be compromised and may lead to over-precautious treatment to be on the safe side. For this reason, the UFI concept was developed to assist poison centres with the fast and correct identification of products during an emergency call. The UFI is considered part of the package of information that industry is obliged to acquire and make available. More specifically, it always needs to be in the submission of information in accordance with Annex 8 and printed on or affixed to the label of the product. The UFI is a code which has a defined format. As you can see from the example below, it will contain 16 alphanumerical characters separated by hyphens into 4 blocks, which help improve the readability and make it easier to recognize the UFI among other codes on the label. The letters are all uppercase, and there is no use of ambiguous letters such as O or I, which could be misread for the numbers 0 or 1. Also, although you can't see it, one of the characters in the UFI is a checksum character, which is calculated from the other characters and allows the UFI to be validated. You will see more on validating the UFI in the next presentation. So the UFI is a code, and it needs to be on the product label and included in the submission of information. But what does it correspond to? Well, the principal rule for UFI is that only a single UFI can ever be assigned to one mixture composition. In other words, assigning a UFI to 2 completely different mixture compositions is not allowed. But the UFI is flexible, so conversely, it is possible to assign multiple UFIs to one mixture composition. And this will further be expanded upon in the next presentation. The UFI works to make a link between a specific product on the market and the information submitted on the mixture that product contains. It is on the label of the product, so it can be read out to a poison centre operator in the event of an emergency call. But the UFI itself does not reveal any confidential business information about the mixture, and only poison centres will know what that UFI is linked to. The UFI will be used by poison centres along with other information from the label of the product, such as the trade name or intended use, so that they can quickly identify the exact product in their emergency call. In other words, the UFI could be used to distinguish between 2 different mixture compositions with the same trade name, or confirm that the product was correctly identified based on the other information present as read from the label. While the UFI is a new industry obligation that requires some work, it also offers to serve some benefits along the supply chain when communicating information about mixtures. For example, the UFI can be provided by an upstream supplier to a downstream formulator instead of disclosing the full composition, provided the UFI and its relevant information has first been made available to the poison centres through the same submission obligations. As mentioned already, the UFI has to be either printed on or affixed to the label of the product. It also needs to be clearly visible, legible, and indelibly marked. Another important requirement is that the UFI on the label needs to be preceded by the acronym UFI, so that it can be easily distinguished from other codes. Annex 8 does not further specify any considerations for the placement or positioning of the UFI on the label, but you will need to be prepared to adapt your labels to accommodate the UFI and other label elements in accordance with Annex 8 and the CLP labelling rules. Note that the UFI is considered obligatory supplemental labelling information and also needs to be reflected in the SDS. Of course, there are derogations for the UFI being on the label. For instance, in the case of industrial mixtures or mixtures not packaged, it is sufficient to include the UFI only in the SDS. There are also a number of special considerations for the UFI on the label. For example, on small packages, products with various layers of packaging, unit or monodose packaging, transport packaging, fold-out labels, tie-on bags, and so on. But these will all be clarified in the guidance on labelling and packaging, which is currently being updated. Industry can create a UFI in two different ways, either the online generator tool or by implementing the UFI algorithm into the company's system. Both are publicly available from our website and will be explained in more detail in the next presentation. The importance of having a unique formula identifier has been explained. But what criteria makes it unique? Well, during the development of the UFI algorithm, it was determined that a unique UFI could be achieved with just two input parameters: a formulation-specific number assigned by the company, plus a company-specific value-added tax number, or VAT. Formula numbers may not always be unique from company to company, but VAT numbers are, plus they are generally not confidential. So by using the unique VAT number, the duplication of UFIs generated by companies using the same formulation number can be avoided. Companies need to manage their UFIs in such a way so that they don't reuse their own formulation number, because using the same VAT and formulation number will always create the same UFI. Generating a UFI requires several transformations of the input data to arrive at a unique code. But it is possible to reorganize the information that was entered. So in other words, the UFI code itself can only ever tell you the VAT number and the formulation number that was used to generate the UFI. But it is not possible to retrieve any information on the composition of the mixture. Just to reiterate here on this slide that the VAT was used as a means to develop unique UFI codes, and as such, it is not something that will be checked in the submission. The VAT is also not about tracing products or companies, as it is possible in some cases to generate a UFI based on a VAT that is different from the submitter. For example, a mother company wishing to use their VAT for all subsidiaries. This approach, though, requires additional UFI management. One important piece of information to point out here is that there is no gain from misusing another company's VAT, but it would be detrimental for the purpose of making an immediate health response. So, labels need to be ready with their UFIs and known to the poison centres before the applicable deadlines. If you recall, 2020 for consumer uses, 2021 for professional, 2024 for industrial use only, and 2025 for mixtures already notified under national regimes. The reprinting of labels also needs to be carefully planned into a company's schedule and can be achieved in advance of the relevant deadlines. And you can start using the UFI on the label already from today. To summarise this presentation, I would like to remind you of some of the main points. Firstly, UFI generation is an obligation for industry, and it needs to be both on the label and in the submission of information, or in the SDS if a derogation applies. The UFI is part of a package of information that will always be submitted together with the other information outlined in Annex 8. The UFI will be used by poison centres to link a product to all the information submitted for that mixture it contains. In other words, a UFI will have no relevance if the poison centre has nothing to link to it. The actual UFI itself can only reveal a VAT number and a formulation number, so no information on mixture composition is compromised. The UFI has a strict rule that only allows one UFI to ever relate to a specific mixture composition. But there is also some flexibility with this. And finally, planning will be required for the labelling changes in order to meet the approaching deadlines, and you can already start now. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and now you will hear from my colleague Daniel Polsky.
Thank you, Heidi. Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Polsky, and in this presentation, I will continue to speak about UFI from the perspective of creation and usage. As you have already heard from previous presentation, UFI is quite flexible, but there are two principles that need to be followed. The first principle is that a UFI is assigned to one and only one mixture composition. The second principle is that the same UFI cannot be assigned to mixtures of different composition. But the other way around is possible. So the same mixture may have multiple UFIs assigned to it. Remember, the UFI itself does not carry information about the mixture composition. It is not possible to decode composition from the UFI that is on the label. In first step, you link UFI to the mixture composition internally in your company. At that stage, only you know the link between the UFI and the mixture composition. In the second step, you will make poison centers notification. You will submit a number of information, one of them being the UFI and the composition that you have assigned to it previously in your company. At that stage, you and poison centers will know the link between the UFI and the assigned mixture composition. So let's have a look on how the composition will be declared to poison centers. In first scenario, where you know all the components of the mixture that you formulate, you simply declare all those components, identifying them by chemical name and other identifiers. You will also need to provide the exact concentration or concentration ranges for each component. They should ideally sum up to 100%. You assign a UFI to such a mixture and submit this UFI along with information on components and concentrations for the use of poison centers. To visualize this, we have a component A with concentration 50%. We have a component B with concentration 35%. And then we have a component C with concentration 15%. We formulate a mixture based on those three components. Now we need to assign a UFI to such a mixture. In this case, it will be UFI number 1. The second scenario is when you use mixtures from your suppliers to formulate your own mixture. We call it mixtures in mixture if suppliers provide composition indirectly via UFI. In this case, you declare each mixture in mixture as it would be a component. You identify MIM by UFI. The UFI replaces the name and the identifiers of the mixture in mixture components. One important thing, the UFI that you receive from your supplier must be already submitted and known to poison centers. So the supplier must first perform all the necessary steps to give a meaning to that UFI. You need to provide exact concentration or concentration ranges for each mixture-in-mixture component, mixture-in-mixture. They also should ideally sum up to 100%. In the end, you need to assign your own UFI to the final mixture. Visually, we can look at the following example. We have a meme A from supplier 1 that is identified with UFI number 1. Then we have meme B from supplier 2 that is identified with UFI number 2. And we also have a meme C from supplier 3 that is identified with UFI number 3. To formulate the final mixture, we use addition of water from our own sources. To formulate the final mixture, we use 20% of meme A, 10% of meme B, 10% of meme C, and we add 60% of water. Such a final mixture will need to get its own UFI. In this example, we will give it a UFI number 4. I mentioned earlier that you need to define concentration of components or mixtures in mixtures as exact percentages or ranges. If you choose ranges, different rules apply for maximum weight of the range, depending whether we speak about a component of major concern for emergency health response or not. So, components of major concern are, for example, those that are classified as for acute toxicity, skin corrosion, or serious eye damage. For such components, allowed ranges are stricter than for the other. If we take example of methanol, present in the mixture in quantity above 25%, the maximum weight allowed is 5%. So, concentration range can be expressed, for example, as 30 to 35%. Defining it as 30 to 40% is not correct, because it exceeds the allowed range width. For other hazardous components, or non-hazardous ones, such as, for example, water, the allowed ranges are broader. For component present in quantity above 25%, the allowed weight is 4 times greater than it was in the case of methanol. You can see in the example the declaration of concentration for water could be even as broad as 30 to 50%. Both tables that you have just seen on the screen can be found in the Annex 8. You will find there as well more details regarding the definition of hazardous components and exceptions made for perfumes and fragrances. Okay, with that I would like to conclude the relation between the UFI and the mixture composition and how the composition is being declared. But before I continue with explaining on how to assign UFIs to product, I need to provide some definitions. When speaking about the mixture, it is meant to be a mixture or a solution containing chemical components having associated properties, such as composition, toxicological properties, color, pH. Product is meant to be a mixture in the form in which it is supplied to the user and defining the other aspects, such as trade name, packaging, labeling, and product category. So now, having explained that, I would like to present to you on how you can assign UFIs to mixtures and products. There are multiple ways on how to do this. I will describe selected approaches that are possible and that are most likely to occur. However, any other approaches are also possible, as long as principles 1 and 2 explained earlier are respected. You can choose a mixture-centric approach. In this case, UFI is always per mixture composition, not per product. In other words, all products containing the same mixture are also labeled with the same UFI. This approach seems suitable if you manage your portfolio based on mixtures and not products. In this example, we assign UFI number 1 to the mixture, and then we print the UFI number 1 on all labels that contain this mixture, regardless of differences in how they are marketed. They can have different trade names or different packaging, but will still have the same UFI on the label. Alternatively, you can choose a product-centric approach. In this case, UFI is always per product, even if other products contain mixture of the same composition. In other words, all products containing the same mixture have different UFIs. In this example, the mixture got 3 UFIs, UFI 1, UFI 2, and UFI 3. Each product containing this mixture got its own UFI, depending on the packaging type. UFI 1 was assigned to a bottle, UFI 2 to an air spray, and UFI 3 to a bottle with handle. This approach seems more suitable for companies that manage portfolio based on products rather than the mixtures. It is also possible to apply a market-oriented approach. In this case, UFI is assigned according to the country where the products are marketed. In the case at hand, the mixture got 2 UFIs, UFI 1 and UFI 2. Products in Germany were assigned UFI 1, and products in Italy were assigned UFI 2. This approach may be useful if you intend to manage portfolio according to the country in which you operate. Yet another approach could be based on the language of the label. In this case, UFIs are assigned based on the language or languages used on the label. Labels can cover more than one country. In the example you can see, the mixture got 2 UFIs, UFI 1 and UFI 2. First, we have an example of a label in one language only that covers more than one country. This would be the label in German language for products that are marketed in Germany and Austria. This label gets UFI number 1. The other scenario is the multilingual label for products marketed in Nordic countries. The label is in Danish, Norwegian, Swedish, and Finnish, and this label got UFI number 2. You can always allocate UFIs according to your preferred approach. It can be any of the presented ones, or a combination of them, or even something that I did not present, as long as you respect the 2 main principles: one UFI, one mixture composition, and the fact that the same UFI cannot be allocated to mixtures of different composition. If that is followed, nothing can go wrong. Okay, let's move now on how to generate the UFIs. As you have already heard, you need 2 elements to be able to generate a UFI. The VAT number of the company. In case you don't have one, there is also a way out, and I will show it to you. And the formulation number in the required format between 0 and 268,435,455. My colleague in the next presentation will say more about practicalities related to the formulation numbers. First, I want to show you how to generate a single UFI. Once you have launched the application using the address as displayed on the screen, you select the language. You can choose any of the EU languages. In first step, you need to enter the VAT number. Next, enter the formulation number, and then click Create and copy your UFI. UFI can be copied to the clipboard by clicking icon placed on the right-hand side. When many UFIs must be created by the same company, using the bulk feature is preferable over the single generation. When using a bulk generation, a set of formulation numbers is given to the application, and then the corresponding UFIs will be returned in a single operation. So, you enter the VAT number, you select the sequential bulk mechanism, you enter the first formulation number, then you type how many UFIs you need to create, and then click Create. As an output, you will receive an Excel sheet with all the UFIs. you can generate this way up to 10,000 UFIs in one operation. There is also possibility to generate multiple UFIs in non-sequential formulation numbers. In this case, at step 3, you will need to provide a CSV file containing formulation numbers. As an output, you will receive back your CSV file with all the UFIs. If you don't have VAT number, you will need to tick the box with declaration that you do not have the VAT number. The application will assign invisible VAT number, which is called company key. Afterward, you proceed as with the single UFI generation. Provide formulation number, click Create, and copy UFI to the clipboard. If you need more information on the UFI generator, you can consult the UFI user guide, which is available in all EU languages. It provides also other information which is not covered by this presentation, such as browser requirements or cookie usage. In some cases, efficient creation of UFI can only be achieved by integrating the UFI generator into your company's internal IT systems. This could be particularly useful and efficient for companies managing large number of formulations. For this, you can consult the UFI Developer's Manual available on our website. Last but not least, the application can be useful for validating UFIs. You can validate your own UFI if you have any doubts about the correctness of it. But important to know is that UFI validator does not say if the UFI has been submitted. For example, if you receive UFI for a MIM or a mixture-in-mixture from your supplier, the UFI validator cannot tell you if your supplier made a submission for poison centers. It can only tell you if the number itself is or is not correct. In case UFI is not correct, the application will provide you with the reasons why. In examples here, you can see the incorrect UFIs because of invalid character, because of inverted character, or because of missing character. With that, I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and I will now pass the floor to my colleague Daniela Ape, who will speak about managing of UFIs.
Thank you, Daniel. Hello everyone. My name is Daniele Ape. So far, you have listened to presentation on what is UFI and how to create and use it. My presentation on how managing the UFI is the final one for today's UFI webinar. For this presentation, what I would like to share with you over the next few slides are some of the key areas for consideration for the management of the UFI in your company. We will take a look at what you need to consider before creating your UFI, some factors that may assist with determining which UFI approach is best for your mixture and products, and we will discuss mapping consideration, with a particular emphasis on your company's internal formulation codes. Finally, we will look at when you need to update your UFI and how using the UFI can be helpful for industry in case of voluntary submission, for example. So it should be clear by now that UFI generation is industry responsibility, is industry's obligation. But how this is achieved depends on the company's needs and portfolio. For example, a company with a very limited portfolio may opt for the online generation of single or bulk UFIs. On the other hand, a company with a large portfolio or who wishes a more automated approach may prefer to develop the algorithm in the home system. Consideration must be given at this point to where the list of bulk generated UFI will be stored and maintained, and of course, who manages it. Another important aspect is determining which VAT should be used. In most cases, companies will probably use their own, but there are some situations where some internal consultation may be required. For example, take a situation of a daughter company who is responsible for placing on the market, but the mother company wishes to manage and distribute the UFIs based on their VAT number. So in the previous presentation, the various approaches to assigning UFIs were explained. But to determine the UFI approach that is right for your mixture or product, you first need to assess your portfolio structure and the current management system. And you have to consider, for example, how you currently allocate formulation codes and names. Also, you will need to assess the way changes in composition are monitored. From here, you are already well positioned to determine the UFI approach, the UFI approach or approaches for your company, that being mixture, product, market, or label-centric approaches, as we saw before. Once you have determined the right approach, you will need to further assess other elements of information that will most likely require some mapping. For example, you will need to assign and possibly map product category, a color, a packaging type and size according to the values available for selection in the harmonized format. You have also seen in the earlier presentation that the components concentration ranges are strictly defined, and you may need to align with them in case you do it differently today. Coming back to the generation of the UFI, in many cases you will be required to do some mapping between your company's internal formula codes or names to a formulation number that will be accepted by the UFI generating tools. So as you can see, this all requires some extra work in your company. Work to compile this information into a package which is suitable for the submission. To be more specific on this last point, the table that we are showing here now shows you examples of possible formula codes or formula name with reason why some of those cannot be used for the purpose of generating UFIs. In the first 4 examples, you can see that special characters or letters are used, and as such will need to be mapped to a new formulation number. Example 5 contains only numbers, but still it will still require a new formulation number because it exceeds the maximum number allowed by the required formulation. Finally, example 6 contains a decimal point, which is ignored by the system, so it can be reused to generate the UFI. And so can example 7, as it fits the required format. So basically, only these last 2 example formulation codes do not need additional mapping. It is not a one-off task to assign a UFI. The UFI reflects the mixture composition at the moment when the UFI has been assigned to that mixture. So when the mixture composition changes, the UFI also needs to change. In other words, UFI and its changes depend on the mixture composition in the chemistry context, not the product in the commercial context. It is also important to note that if your mixture changes composition, you cannot reuse the same formulation number to generate UFIs, because in that case, the UFI will be the same as the previous one. So what are the factors that require the change of UFI? In general, you need a new UFI when you add, substitute, or delete a component. Also, when your supplier changes the UFI, and this has an impact on a mixture in a mixture. And finally, when you keep all the same components, but you change their concentration beyond the allowed variation, which I will explain more on the next slide. So here you can see an example of a component in a mixture at exactly 30%, which according to table 3 in Annex 8 is allowed only a 5% variation in the concentration, meaning that if the concentration falls below 28.5% or exceeds 31.5%, then a new UFI is required. When you change the UFI, you also need to update a number of things in parallel. First, you need to update the submission made for poison centers and inform them about a new UFI assigned to the product. Secondly, the product needs to be relabeled to reflect the new UFI on it. You may also be in the position where you supply your mixture to other formulators, and they depend on the UFI that you communicated to them earlier. In that case, you also need to inform your supply chain downstream about the change that you made. You are also allowed to update the UFI voluntarily, for example, for commercial reasons, even if nothing has changed in the mixture composition. But in that case, all the duties related to updating the information apply. So voluntary submission may be considered for mixtures that are not classified or that are classified for environment only. As the name suggests, voluntary submission are just that. They are not mandatory in any way. But it might be possible that industry would like to use a UFI for this mixture for maintaining confidentiality in the supply chain, for example. In order though to be able to use the UFI in this way, the UFI must be known to poison centers by means of a submission along with all the other necessary information. In this case, placing the UFI on the label is optional, and there are for and against doing so. Having it on the label could be helpful indeed for poison centers in the event of an emergency, though it has also been suggested that having the UFI on the label might imply that the product is hazardous, even if it is not. So before I conclude this presentation, I would like to remind you again the 2 points. One, UFI and its changes depend on the composition of the mixture and not the product in the commercial context. And 2, formulation numbers to generate the UFI must be specific per mixture composition. So if mixture composition changes, also formulation code in your company should change. You have been following 3 parts of this webinar. We presented to you what is the UFI concept and how to create and use it. I also presented some consideration on how to manage the UFI and will now like to present some relevant support material and some concluding remarks. So the UFI is a new concept and we get a lot of questions arising from this topic. As such, we have developed a basic introductory animation explaining the UFI concept and also a short in-brief publication which looks at the UFI concept in a bit more of detail. We also have a Q&A section, question and answer section on our website with a dedicated UFI topic. So please do submit your questions if you would like something to be clarified or if it was not covered in today's webinar. Your questions help us to expand this section of our website. Today's webinar focused on the UFI, which is just one of many information elements required in a submission needed for poison centers. so they can provide an emergency health response. The guidance on Annex 8 will be finalized by the end of this year and addresses all the aspects of the submission according to Annex 8 and not only the UFI. Additionally, the guidance on classification and labeling is very much relevant and will also be updated, and especially in the context of UFI, and it is expected to undergo consultation very soon. So to conclude on today's webinar, remember that the two main UFI principles must be respected. The main one being that one UFI can only be assigned to one mixture composition. UFI only serves a purpose if it has been submitted, and it only makes sense when it is linked to other information. A UFI itself does not contain any information other than a VAT and a formulation number. The UFI works to protect your confidential business information, not to expose it. Correct UFI management is vital. If UFIs are mismanaged, it means that inappropriate information will be available to poison center, and this may prevent them from providing the right advice in the case of emergency. So don't forget, the first deadline to submit information for consumers' product is fast approaching, already January 2020. And finally, remember that you can submit when your deadline comes, but you need to plan labeling activities much earlier than that. You can start already as of today. And with that, I would like to thank all of you for your attention. And please remember that we will now available online until 1 o'clock Helsinki time to answer the remaining questions that you post. I have heard that we have already received quite many questions. So if your question is not answered today, or if you have any more question after this webinar, you can always submit it to the ECHA help desk.